Charlene, it's really nice to have you here. And we were talking about some of our earliest memories being of cooking with our grandmothers, if we were lucky enough to live close enough to do that. And as you had mentioned, it's not too early for people to start if they're still lucky enough to have a grandparent close by.
Exactly. And if you haven't started baking with your children, start now. I have 4 daughters, and I started baking with them when they were just in their carriers, to have them in the kitchen with me so that they would have that fun experience of baking and family, of baking together. So any age is a great time to start, but if you have grandparents that you can still go back and talk to, aunts and uncles even, to talk about some of their favorite recipes. And
write down some of theirs that are in their heads.
Exactly, that you can then pass on to your children and to other generations.
I was just going to comment on the cute display, and you said it's not just a pretty display, it's talking about the importance of apples and how lucky we are to have so many varieties to choose from.
There are more than 7,000 varieties of apples. It's just unbelievable. But apples were always the mainstay in the family, with one of the fruits that you'd always have. Usually everybody had an apple tree that was growing in their area. And so there's many, many varieties of apples, and it makes such a great family activity to maybe go to an orchard, a farmer's market, or even the grocery store. Let everyone in the family pick out a different kind of apple and then slice it into wedges, and then go home where everyone can sample everybody's apple.
Do a taste test.
Exactly. And some of them have such fun names anymore for apples, and see which one you like the best. We have a whole section on our website, if you go to homebaking.org, of apple activities that you can do with your family or even do in the classroom at school.
Well, and talk about, some apples are really good for eating out of hand. They're juicy and crisp, and then there are those that are better for baking. So there's so much to learn about it and to teach and share.
Absolutely. And you know, when we're baking, we want to make sure that we get that little bit firmer apple that's going to hold its shape a little bit more when we're making apple pies or apple cakes, rather than the ones that are soft like a delicious apple, which doesn't hold up when we're actually baking.
Those are good points. Well, and we're going to make one of your grandmother's recipes.
This is my grandmother Nora's recipe. I was fortunate enough to be able to bake and cook with both of my grandmothers. And what I've done is cream our butter and our sugar together, and it takes about 5 to 8 minutes. You want to have that butter at room temperature, and then let it just keep mixing, because you'll think that you're done.
Not too hard, but not too soft
exactly.
either.
And you can see how nice and fluffy that is. One of the great things about the book as well is that in the back is a glossary. So if you're not sure what creaming means, you and your child can learn together and see what that means and do that together.
That's the best way.
Exactly. Now we're going to add the eggs, and we'll add them one at a time because it's easier to mix them together. And if you had creamed this using a hand mixer, then you could go ahead and add the eggs and continue mixing with your hand mixer. But I wanted to show how easy it is to just go ahead and do it with a spoon.
So you don't have to have a lot of equipment if you don't.
And children can help with this. Let them help stir these things in.
And they can stir for a long time. While you're stirring, though, I do want to show, we were talking about this Baking with Friends book, and I really enjoyed it, even though I'm not one of the young ones baking in it, but the fun facts you have, and it was talking about the apples, and then on each recipe it has family activities, as you were talking about. So the book itself is a great learning tool, whether you're homeschooling your children or these could be after-school activities. It's a wonderful book. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Every recipe has those things that you mentioned that are tailor-made for that particular recipe. There's also a resource sheet in the back that I just loved. It's called the checklist. And as you are teaching new skills to your child, they can check off what they've learned. So today they learned creaming, and maybe next time they're going to learn what it means to actually a timer. What does a timer do? You know, why do we need that in baking?
I wanted to show this little certificate. You know, we could make these on our computer, or you could copy this, but you know, instant gratification, that's what it's all about. So while the cake is baking, you can talk about other things, and then when you do that first taste, and it's just wonderful, no matter what it tastes like, it's wonderful.
And you know, sometimes we have to create those opportunities to bake with our families and share those recipes. I always bake collages with my girls at Christmas time.
It's a tradition.
Because you make time to do that. So you've got to make those times to do it. Look how creamy that is. We've added those eggs, and you have this nice creamy mixture. So now we're going to start adding the other ingredients. We'll add the dry ingredients, which is 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour.
And again, it talks in the book about how do you measure flour versus how do you measure brown sugar. One has to be packed, one has to be light and airy.
That's right. And now we're going to add the whole wheat flour. Now, in my recipe that my grandmother had, she just used the all-purpose flour, but we're using a combination, half and half today, so that we can add a little bit more whole grains to our recipes. And that's another great thing about baking, because when you go to the restaurant, when you go to a grocery store, you can't make changes.
No.
But when you're baking it yourself, you can make those changes. Now we're going to add the baking soda. Very good. The cinnamon and nutmeg.
And those are all in here together.
Yes, very good. And I'll let you add the milk. And when you're actually making this with your child, I would add half of the milk at a time. It makes it easier to blend for them. And you can go ahead and add that vanilla.
It's always my favorite ingredient in cooking.
And then we have our other ingredients. We're going to add the apples, and this is 4 cups of apples that we've chopped. And it doesn't have to be chopped or fine or small. However you do it is great. If you have a little bit larger chop, then you're going to be able to see the apples a little bit more in the cake. If it's finer, then it'll be a little bit finer apples.
And we've left the peel on.
We sure
did.
That's
important to talk about the nutrition there, isn't it?
Exactly. We're getting that extra fiber, and as long as you wash those apples good, there's no reason to take it off. Then we have raisins, half a cup of raisins, and I've plumped those ahead of time because that makes them
Tell us
nice
what
and
that
moist.
means.
Well, when you plump raisins, you just put a little bit of water on top of them. I usually, if I'm using half a cup of raisins, I'd use a half a cup of water. Put that on it, let it stand for a little bit, and then drain that water off, and they plump right up. And that way they do not take the moisture out of your baked good of your cake. And then we have a half a cup of pecans that we're adding in.
And you could add walnuts if you preferred those, or whatever. So those are good points to keep in mind.
It's exactly what you were saying as far as you can make it to make your family what they would like it. Then I would put it in the baking dish. It's a greased baking dish. Put that in there. It bakes at 350 degrees for 50 minutes, 50 to 60 minutes. Be sure to use a wooden pick to make sure that it's done in the center.
And the preheating of the oven's important too, isn't it?
It certainly is. We want to make sure that it's preheated.
And here's one that we baked. And we've already cut out that first wonderful slice.
Did.
And you said the sauce that you have on this was also your grandmother's.
It is. It's a vanilla sauce that you make on the stove with water and sugar and butter. You boil it for about 5 minutes to make sure that it's not granulated, that it's all smooth. And then as the cake comes out, you'll add a little bit of vanilla to it, and then you pour it over the warm cake. And then it seeps into that and makes a very delicious sauce.
And what I like, I have a recipe similar, is that you can eat it immediately. You don't have to let it set and cool or whatever. So again, that's that instant gratification, and kids like seeing the final results as much as we do.
And we were saying that, and if you happen to have any that's left, this is a delicious cake, as you said, and it doesn't last long. But if you do, the one thing about apples, it stays so moist.
They do.
It's a perfect dish that you can take to someone else and to share it with.
Well, thank you so much for what you're doing to educate young people and their parents about the importance of cooking. Thank you.
You're welcome.